Perfect. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what part of the world you're in today. I am Kevin Coyne reporting in from remote location in my Airstream. Wanted to make sure that we went ahead and kicked off this next Venture Outfitter Weekly. Real excited today because we have quite a number of countries represented. I actually started a while ago, right before we started recording. We've got Texas, we've got Hawaii, we've got Philippines, we've got Czech Republic, we've got Mexico, we've got Colombia, and we got Uzbekistan all here. Pretty excited about that. So what we'll do is we're going to kick off the next VO Weekly, the Venture Outfitter Weekly. What we are here to do is working with each other, building ventures that matter, and it's exciting to do. So Venture Outfitter Weekly, today we're going to talk about accelerating disruptive transformation, reshaping the future. This is going to be building on some of the conversations we had at the end of the year just a couple of weeks ago. But welcome to the Venture Outfitter. And part of what we're here to do is to support your ventures because typically the entrepreneurs that work with the Tech Ranch are entrepreneurs that are driving positive world change. And I'm real excited to have you all here today. Thank you to Linda Blackman and her team at DualWorks for sponsoring our studio. Although I'm physically in my Airstream base camp offsite and I'm not in the studio today, I am excited to always say thanks to Linda. Linda and I just had dinner a couple of nights ago, and she was talking about what's happening at DualWorks. DualWorks is a co-working place. It's at 183 Mopac. If you're looking for a place to office anything from a closed door office to just a mailbox or a point of presence in Austin, it's a great place to land. And Linda's going to be launching a bunch of other things. We will be having some events there, physical events, now that we're all beyond COVID. So if you've got questions, ask myself or Jello, and you can go to techranch.com/dualworks for a few more details. But ask us about it because there are special deals that we can get for you and all that sort of stuff. If you're not on the community site yet, please join. We have launched the first paid part of the community site called the Venture Outfitter. But the truth is that if you've been involved in the family of Tech Ranch for a while, there's a free part that we really want you involved in. And so you don't have to actually pay to get involved in the free part of the community. There's a lot of value there in that, just like we had on our Slack and on our Mighty networks in the past, there's a lot of interaction that just happens back and forth. And so anyone that can do this. If you're not able to get to that QR code that's displayed, this will be in the show notes, as well as you can reach out to Jello directly or send an email at start@techranch.com, and you can join us as well there. We'd love to have you. And like I said, the only requirement for the free level of the community is that we want you to be an entrepreneur who's doing something that has some type of impact story, even if you're at the very beginning of your journey, all the way up to the larger corporations. That we have a number of corporations that are getting involved in sponsoring some of the activities that you guys are up to. So coming soon, next week on January 19th, we are going to invite a number of our collaborators from Norway, specifically from the city of Kristiansand, Norway. Kristiansand is in the county, Agder County, which is kind of like the southwest part of Norway. Tech Ranch has done a lot of things like that with that part of the world. And we're going to have a number of other Norwegians as well that are going to be listening in. So excited about that because there's been a lot of really great activities that happened historically in Norway, and especially with Kristiansand. And so we'll hear directly about some of the activities. We'll hear about what the University of Agder has launched based on the design that Tanya, one of the long-term technology or consultants around Tech Ranch, and myself planted some seeds there about 3-4 years ago that now have started coming through. We'll talk about that next time. So join us. And if you're looking at, if someone happens to hear about this program and you're wondering, okay, what has Tech Ranch done in this multiple locations across the world? This is going to be a great example of that, because it's a long-term partnership, and it didn't take a lot of cash to drive the activities that we're talking about. So it's not about lots of investment. It's about the right type of relationships that are producing action back and forth. We'll also get to have a little bit more of an idea about what's going on in Kristiansand. So please join us. So I always like to have a quote, and there's a quote that I actually thought was going to be really appropriate for what's happening. 2003 is actually the year that the activities that eventually became known as Tech Ranch began. And so there's this place called the Wizard Academy in Austin. It's kind of a business school for the small business that I'm actually a contributor to. And there's this one plate that's there that you see a picture of here. I'm going to read the quotes, but it's really appropriate for the story I'm going to tell you on the next slide. The quote is a T.S. Eliot quote. It says, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." T.S. Eliot, and it says, Little Giddlings, the fourth of four quartets. Interesting quote. And I think that a lot of times as entrepreneurs, and I feel this in my own entrepreneurial journey, this part of my career, for those of y'all that know my career, I actually started my career as an entrepreneur in '94. My career, with my first real job started in '89. I didn't get my degree till the end of 1990. I'm a little older than most of y'all. But the thing that's interesting about this is that this year will, in some ways, we're going to celebrate the 20-year anniversary of Tech Ranch and have some special things happen. Although Tech Ranch wasn't named Tech Ranch until 2008, 2009. But the reason I mention that is some of the photos that you see in front of us are from activities that happen in Chile. And there's a book that I never have published that I wrote 200 pages on, that I have made a commitment that by the end of 2023, you'll have it in your hands if you want to. We'll publish it. But the start of the book is in 2003, I went to Chile to start a revolution. The whole idea is that by supporting a group of entrepreneurs that are committed to changing the world for the better and working together as a community of practice, we as the community can support each other to actually change the world for the better. A lot of people think that it's just about, living in a capitalistic society, that it's all about capital. I actually think that we're about to see a change in what's happening. And I fundamentally believe in entrepreneurship. And part of the thing that I think is going to emerge is that, yes, it'll be capitalistic about what's coming, but to really drive the impact that we want to see, it's going to be about us working together at even a higher level. So in 2003, I had the intuition that the hero's journey of entrepreneurship, that is, if you've ever read about Joseph Campbell wrote a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And essentially that book was the basis of what was in the basis of Star Wars, the movie Star Wars, and a number of different movies. That the idea is that this fundamental journey of what's happening as us as humans is what we go through and drives the deeper meanings in our life. But it's because, if we focus on that as a community of practice of entrepreneurs, we can drive a whole different outcome. So 2003, I had this intuition. I went to Betty Sue Flowers, who's the director of the LBJ Library. The LBJ Library is the Lyndon Baines Johnson Presidential Library based here in Austin, Texas. And she said, if you're serious about this vision, you need to go meet this guy. Oh, by the way, he's a senator. Oh, by the way, he's a presidential hopeful in Chile. And she didn't know it at the time, but that morning I had been invited to Chile by one of my friends from high school who knew I was all torn up about losing a friend that had just died. Make a long story short, I now understand And I was reflecting over the little bit of holiday we had around Christmas and New Year's, that I now understand what it was that was driving that vision. And I'm real excited about that. I'm going to be talking about it on each one of our programs in the next 8 weeks. I'll share a little bit of the story. I think that it's important to actually have speakers like we're going to have today to talk about that are pointing to the way the future is shaping, and how we can actually take advantage of the forces that are coming on, the technologies that are coming on, the social desires that are coming on to the world, and shape them as entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs are the purveyors of culture, and we need to get out in front of this and drive these changes. But in the crisis of Danielle's death in 2003, and the intuitions I had when I say I was on the mountain in Salt Lake City, actually in Park City on a snowboarding, trying to defrag my head, I now understand something about that. I'll start sharing about that on each one of these programs. And we're going to use this as the basis of some of the stuff that's happening in the community. That's where community.techranch.com, that's where that community of practice is so critical. So get involved in the community. If you're not on that site, if you're not going to it, install the application on your phone and you can get more interactions. I will be posting almost on a daily basis interesting articles that I'm seeing towards this, but we'd like to get you involved. It's not just about publishing from Kevin. It's about, having a place that you can step into and say, hey, I need the following thing. I request the following insight, whatever it might be that you need to drive your venture forward. Take advantage of that. And with my friends in Chile, you see Leonardo on the upper left. You see some of the people that we collaborated with in the middle on these photos, some of the different times that happened. The main thing to think about is, I'm going to be going back to Chile this year as well. I'm looking forward to it. There'll be a bunch of other things that are going to happen, and kind of recognizing this 20-year journey and how, we've returned for the first time to a place that I saw glimpses of 20 years ago. And I'm excited about what this represents. There was a question that just came out. What chat thing did Kevin just mention? This is, if you're not involved in community.techranch.com, make sure that you get an invite to community.techranch.com. And there's a channel on there that's called Pound Request, that if there's something you're looking for to drive your venture forward for free, you can post a request there and say, hey, I need help on the following thing. And Jello in the next 2 weeks is going to be inviting the 400 people that were in the Slack channels, in our previous Slack channels that we did a lot of stuff on Slack. He's going to be inviting that group of people in there. So we're going to have a lot more muscle there. But while it's still family members, close family members of the Tech Ranch involved, make sure you're in there to take advantage of all that sort of stuff. Perfect. Okay, well, I tell you what, I'm excited about what this all represents. And we'll be telling more of the story about what's happening very shortly. So today we're going to be talking about accelerating disruptive transformation, reshaping the future. And we have a special guest speaker, John Rodgreb, that's going to be sharing with us. The main thing about this is, in preparing for today, the thing I want to put a little bit of history on this is on at the end of the year, I think it was December 29th, we actually had a program called Here Comes the Future, where I talked about, 8 of the technologies that I saw that were about to change the world and all that sort of stuff. And also, some of the social changes that we're actually recognizing that are going to create a lot of upheaval. And John saw this on one of the, he saw it like spooling out onto LinkedIn, I think. And he said, hey, Kevin, I like what you've done. What I've been doing, what he had been doing is, focusing a lot more of the conversation about how do you deal with this in your job if there's all this upheaval. I've known him through a number of different organizations, including the Austin. There's a job club that he was part of the management of years ago, helping people just get involved in stuff like that. So I want to introduce him today. John is a sales performance management expert. He's a strategist and he's a futurist. And he studied history, but it's interesting. He's got this history background, but then he actually has the technology that he actually has been, working in for many years. And so he's got this special way of tying those together. We're going to hear from him in a first of a series of different talks that he'll be giving to give us a little bit of insight. He will be taking some questions towards the end of the time. If you want to, you can put them into chat. You can put them into the LinkedIn feeds. I am going to be opening up the LinkedIn feed myself, so I'll be personally tracking that very soon. And if there's anything that you'd like to get out in front of that I think this is really critical. This is a critical set of questions, because we need to figure out how to take advantage of these changes and what to do about them with regards to how we interact and how we prepare our startups, our entrepreneurs, our communities, the people involved in that. John, thank you for joining us today. Why don't you come on to the screen, and I'd love to actually have you join us and lead us into this conversation about what you see happening. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. So let me bring this up. And I love your focus on having a better future and possibly a better capitalism, a better democracy. That's kind of what drew me to this. I'm a bit of an idealist, even though I've been a technologist. But I saw disruption and transformation happening all my life. In information, we've gone from mainframes to PCs, to mid-ranges, to PCs. I've been involved in database first and SPM later. Then we started doing networking. I was involved with Novell, early networking. Then we went client server, we went to the web, we went to the cloud, we saw cell phones come in, broadband, on and on and on. And it's been nothing but transformation in the information sector. And there's been other disruption as well. So, the phrase, creative destruction was popularized by Schumpeter, an economist from the late 19th and 20th century. So these things are happening, and I was an observer. As a historian, I've been an observer. As a technologist, I've been active, and I kind of saw, if you'll take a history laying out in front of us, when I started studying this think tank about 3 years ago, that a friend of mine sent me, and I'll get into that here in a second. So the main thing I wanted to talk about today is disruptive technological transformation. All of this is a mouthful. I'm looking for better titles, but I just have to keep working at it to get it really pithy and good. So, what does Rethink X look at disruptions and transformations? That's what drew me to it. Their leader, Tony Seba, basically said, we are starting on the journey. We're having these transformations in two key areas, energy and transportation. And they're already in progress, and they are going to change the world. Now, in 3 years of really studying this deeply and trying to disprove him, there's some minor points I don't agree with, but he's been pretty prescient on all of that. So we'll look at energy real quickly. Renewables primarily, they are transforming many, many things, and how that lays out, and then how does that impact transportation? Because that's primarily electrification. But also it keys into business models. And we've seen a lot of disruptive business models. Of course, those bring it back here to entrepreneurism. I had my first entrepreneurial company in, 95? Then I joined Pervasive Software, who eventually IPO'd in 97. I was just a little cog in the big wheel there. I got involved with Calidus. I've done a number of entrepreneurial things over the years, so I know a little bit about that. And I've worked for ginormous businesses like TCS, 500,000 of my best Indian friends. So I think I've got a pretty broad perspective. And then the big thing these days is zero carbon, climate change, all that sort of thing. So I might have time to talk a little bit about how we actually get there and where the opportunities are. And as you mentioned, Launchpad Job Club, I did a couple of these talks to them. And of course, I framed it around what are the jobs of the future? And of course, we all want to retire. So what are the companies that are coming up? What are the investment opportunities so that we can invest and retire comfortably? That, of course, aligns with where entrepreneurs need to go. So we may have a little bit of time at the end for some analysis and discussion. What does this mean for our future? How do we make a better future? What are the important things? And I have some, and in that place, I have some opinions on that. Most of this is just observation. You said I've got a way of putting this, and I do think I have a bit of a gift for extrapolating this and saying what could happen. So hopefully I can share that. A lot of people who see this stuff happening, and change is upsetting. But if it's change for the better, if the market's going great guns and you've got money in your 401k and those are invested in the right place, then that's a good kind of change. Gee, my 401k is growing, or, the housing, I bought a house in a great neighborhood and the housing market's coming up and my house is increasing in price, or, there are good changes as well as bad changes, but changes are unsettling. So the way that Rethink X frames this is that there are 5 main civilizational sectors. This is basically a model. There's information, and we've seen disruptive transformations happening in the technology for 70 plus years now. There's energy and transport. We've been a fossil fuels extractive economy. Transport has also been mainly on fossil fuels. So those two are in the process. We've seen renewables and electrification coming along in the last decades and even centuries. And then there are a couple other sectors, food and materials, that you'll hear people talk about as things we need to do if we're going to get to zero carbon, if we're going to stop this climate change, stop at least the human contribution to this climate change thing. And so those two, energy and transport, and certainly information is not stopping in its transformation. Those two are just at the early part. So how do these things unfold is one of the key things I want to inform people here, so that we have a foundation of the sectors and how these things tend to unfold. Others that you might be interested, medicine, labor, other areas are kind of impactful, but I think if you divide it into these 5, you can talk about these major disruptive changes to civilization and society in a coherent way. Any questions so far?
What we might do is do this as questions happen. We'll actually have just
Sure.
we'll have them raise their hands or something like that, and then have a little bit of time to be more interactive towards the end too. I think that'd be great. I'll definitely have some. I've already got some questions for you for sure.
And yell at me or Jello, yell at me if we have one in chat.
Sounds
so,
good.
We've also, this is the same thing as creative destruction. And here I listed a bunch of major disruptions. First there was fire. We were able to get proteins, hunt and roast meat. And hopefully, allegedly that grew our big brains. We had bronze. Some of these dates are pretty amazing, and this could make a whole show all of its own. For instance, one of the key ones in information is the printing press, Gutenberg. We've got one of those Bibles here in Austin, Texas, in fact, at the University of Texas. First battery was 1800. First lithium ion was 74. Steam started in 1698. You've got EVs. The first EV was 1832, believe it or not. So we go on and on. Client server to internet and cloud started in 69 with the internet. Cell phones, cloud computing, broadband. It was a 0.5 megabyte broadband connection in 2000. And look how fast that has gone. And one of the interesting things to me is how much more this is accelerating, and it's broadening too. It's going from information. We've now got all this compute power that informs our actual physical ability to do chemistry and physics and those sorts of things too. Smartphones came along with convergence in 2007. You had phones and broadband and CPUs and memory and video screens all converging to make the first effective smartphone, the iPhone, in 2007. But IBM had the first smartphone in 92. So these things start early, and then when they hit, they take off. And that's a little bit of what I want to talk about. So what is one of these?
John, we have a question from Paul.
Sure.
I don't know if you want me to interrupt, but Paul, did you want to ask your question really quick?
All right, real quick, and don't answer this if it takes away some of your thunder later on in your presentation. But my question is, what is the current most disruptive technology? And if you do, and if this is a spoiler, don't answer. Just continue on.
Personally speaking, I think it's energy. It's not a spoiler, because energy underpins everything. When we went from fire to steam to fossil fuels to electricity to nuclear, those were huge changes. But renewables, they're distributable. Everybody could own their own piece. Whether or not they will or not, I don't know. They're clean, so that's going to have a huge impact on medicine and insurance. And it can be everywhere. And the cost is going to, the renewables have come down 90% per decade for 3 decades so far. And I don't know that they're going to go down 90% per decade in the next decade, but I think they will go down through innovation in the next 2 decades. And when you go from an average cost for electricity of around 13 cents to 1 cent, or essentially free, it's revolutionary. You know, what can we do with power? But I'll get into that. That really doesn't steal the thunder. It sets the stage. And thank you for that, Paul. So what do these look like? Here's one that you can actually see visually. So in 1900 on Fifth Avenue in New York City, where is the car? There's one car in this picture, and it's already shown. So 13 years later, almost the same shot. Where is the horse? 13 years, and everything changed. All the manure was out of New York City by then. All the people who had stables, all the grooms, all the wagon makers, they had all converted to cars. All the people who drove wagons learned to drive cars, or they were out of work. And you had this. Now, cars didn't take across the entire country for everything in 13 years, but the massive change in New York City alone was incredible. So that's how these things can look. And, you know, we personally all seen this in smartphones. You know, used to be people had landlines and flip phones. And, you know, we saw that go in about 2000 to today in 20 years, from landlines to everybody practically has a smartphone. Here's how the experts looked at it. AT&T hired McKinsey. They said, what are these cell phones going to do? McKinsey said, oh, you'll have less than 1 million customers in 15 years. They were off by a factor of 120. So why do the experts get all this wrong too? And this is the opening, of course, for entrepreneurs. If the experts are getting it wrong, what can we know and do? What can we be visionary about that allows us to push this forward and take advantage of it? Again, why do smart people and smart organizations consistently fail to anticipate or lead these? They usually extrapolate these as a linear process, and they're not linear. Now, not all of these technology disruptions really hit, and some of them do progress linearly, but the ones that hit have a different curve. And we've seen this in computing and information. Moore's law, data storage, digital imaging, network capacity, and I referenced lithium ion. Lithium ion, solar photovoltaics, and wind have decreased in cost and increased in capability roughly 90% per decade now for 3 decades. It's just astonishing. Okay. And this is what the curves look like when these things really hit and take off. You see color TVs taking over from black and white TV, probably some people moving straight to color, you know, leapfrogging radio and newspaper. In Africa, I imagine some of you have heard, you know, Africa didn't have phones in many, many places, and they completely leapfrogged landlines for the most part and went straight to cell phones, and then banking started being done for disadvantaged and village communities over cell phones. But this is how some of these curves tend to look when they really hit. They inch along for a while, and then they explode until they get saturated. And if they start in the US or the EU or whatever, then they would spread to, Asia, to Mexico, to Canada, and then to more second and third world. So, and renewable energy will do that too. And I suspect electrification, electric vehicles will do that too. They're starting to show that already. And that's in those two areas, that is because the costs are coming down dramatically. Okay, I mentioned Rethink X. Tony Seba taught at Stanford. He's been studying this for 25 years. He's been making predictions for 15. I tried to disprove him. His research director is Adam Dorr. I've got his latest book, and you can go see some of his keynotes. He's got some great videos that are about a year old that talk about, rethinking all of these different sectors. Transportation, he does keynotes. He's got a book called Clean Disruption. He's got multiple areas and white papers on all of this stuff. I highly recommend it. This is the new one, Brighter. This is the book I wanted to write. I think Dr. Adam Dorr did a better job than I could ever do. But I also take a very kind of historical and economic view, and he takes a more scientific view. So I may yet write this book as I get deeper and deeper into this and continue to write and talk about this. So there you go, Paul. Energy. So what if we had free power for everybody? What would that do? Or if power effectively was free, if it all came down 90% and you could go out and buy your batteries and solar cells, put them on your home for very little and have all your own power and sell some of it back and it costs you nothing. Just think about what kind of changes that would make. Okay, so how do these transformations go about? I think this is a really interesting little piece. So you get these new technologies, you get more demand, more supply, you start getting economies of scale, and that brings down the demand and supply for other stuff. So you get network effects, public acceptance, capability, lower costs. I think we've all seen that. We've seen that in information. We've seen that in renewables. We've seen that in Austin, especially in EVs. And that weakens the old technology. You get less economy of scale. It increases prices. It upsets people because things get more expensive, things that they were used to. And then it pushes people into the new technologies. Now, smartphones are kind of an exception. They're more expensive, but they're not more expensive than having all of your music, your cell phone, your camera, and your computer all on one device. So that's why you could get a $500 or $1,000 cell phone and sell it to people, because they can do everything. But I think this is very instructive in how these things happen when they kick off. And I want to reiterate, they don't always kick off. They can sometimes lump along at a linear rate for years, if not decades. But usually, when you have this disruption S-curve and it really hits, it starts doubling, the purchase and the acceptance of these new technologies, it goes to a higher point. The technologies get adopted more and more broadly because they're cheaper and more capable. And the old systems fade and go away. They don't completely go away, but they become very niche. And we're starting to see this with solar, wind, and batteries, especially because as a group, they make for a highly effective total energy system. But for a number of reasons, they have a different architecture than fossil fuels. I probably don't have time to get into that today, but I can at some future point. I mentioned this, solar costs have come down. These are the actual curves. 82% in 10 years there, and 72% is predicted before 2030. 2 decades before, they were coming down 90% or so. Interestingly, on the solar, MIT just came out with a flexible, printable solar cell. They are working on a protective, transparent covering for it, but you'll be able to print your solar roof or print, you could print solar cells on a sail and put an electric motor in a sailboat and generate electricity for the sailboat off of the sails. It's going to cheapen the amount it costs to build solar cells. It'll probably take 5 years to manufacture it, but it's going to bring it way, way down. Wind costs continue to come down at 50% or more. The wind turbines now are amazing. They're putting deep water floating wind turbines in. They're putting the wind turbines up 800 feet and making them bigger and bigger. They're doing all kinds of research left and right about wind turbines. Amazing technology. It's going in all over Europe because of the conflict in Ukraine. And then batteries. And we're going to move off of lithium ion. I get lots of people saying, oh, do we have enough lithium? You know, what are we going to do? There's not going to be enough lithium. This is all going to fall in on itself. I wrote an article on LinkedIn about 30 different battery technologies that are coming on for all sorts of different things. So, you know, these are coming down right now. A Tesla, if the battery goes bad, it's $12,000 to $20,000. In 10 to 15 years, when the warranty on a new Tesla runs out, it's an 8-year warranty on the battery. You have to replace the battery. It's liable to be $1,200 to $3,000 to replace that battery. That makes it very palatable to run it for another 200,000 miles. This was a couple of years ago. How am I doing on time, Kevin?
Go right ahead. We another 5 minutes if we can, and then we might. I know that we will have some questions interacting from the studio audience as well as on the online on the LinkedIn and Facebook feeds as well.
Great. Well, this is where they were a couple of years ago, and you can see that solar, wind, and batteries are more expensive than solar and wind, but those are the two cheapest. I've seen auctions at 1.3 cents per kilowatt hour. So I think, you know, solar is faster than this. The other thing about solar and wind is once you've found the location, you can permit and start building these things in a year or two. It takes 5 to 10 years to build a gas or coal plant, 10 to 15 years to build a nuclear plant. You know, they're promising we'll have faster ones that are cheaper, but it ain't happening anytime before, you know, a decade at least. And through innovation, the prices on batteries, wind, and solar are continuing to come down. Okay, I already went through this. I think this is one that's really important here. The clean energy U-curve. So if we were to put in solar, wind, and batteries all across the US, the most effective way, the cheapest cost and the most stable and consistent energy is if we were to build out close to 4 times the generating capacity. And that gives us the least battery, which is the most expensive part of the 3. But that means we have a lot of extra energy a lot of the time. What do we do with this energy? Well, we could give it away to entrepreneurs. If they have an energy intensive business, we use it or lose it if we can't even store it, and if it's solar or wind. So we might as well give it away to people to help them build their businesses. Here's another really cool one that's coming along is geothermal. And in the brine out in California, they are extracting lithium and other minerals from the brine they're pulling up in geothermal. There's some amazing developments in geothermal for base load power coming along as well. But this U-curve, where you have 4 times the generating capacity, winds up giving you superpower. Very cheap, virtually free power you can give away if you want. What could we do with superpower? We could desalinate water and reclaim deserts. We will fund and fuel electric transportation. We can heat homes with it and buildings. We can recycle. One of the costs in recycling today is recycling is not economical and efficient because of the energy costs. Well, if you lower the energy cost 90%, you can start to recycle a whole lot more things. And, you know, we've extracted enough steel, aluminum, and plastic and fossil fuels that if we could recycle everything we put in dumps, you know, that would be amazing. And we can have green concrete and steel, which are a big part of the CO2 load. So this superpower that goes along with the architecture of solar, wind, and battery is really, really interesting. Transportation, that's been disrupted too. Those come down. And the key here is fossil fuels really isn't innovating much, but these areas of energy and transportation have huge innovation happening. Building out more and more battery factories everywhere, even in the US. So manufacturing is coming back to the United States. The new bill in Congress last year, now there are a couple of solar panel companies coming back here. And potentially we can leapfrog the solar panels that are being built in China with new technology with printable solar panels or multi-layer solar panels. So we could actually come back and become a leading solar manufacturer in the world.
Let me do this. So just so we have a little bit of time that we can take some questions, and maybe there's a couple other things, because obviously across the 5 different areas that you're saying are getting disrupted, right? There's there's quite a lot of stuff that we could go into more depth on, right?
Sure.
It's interesting. The other thing that I've heard some of those same kind of concerns that you mentioned, that's, battery technology is not there. Well, one of the companies we're working with from Japan has a carbon-based battery technology that's actually more durable than lithium ion. And you just use organic cotton that then produces those carbon batteries. It's really kind of interesting, right? The technologies are there; they're all coming online. The
research and innovation that is going on, and it isn't put in the mainstream media very much. So once I started searching this out, my mind was absolutely blown.
Yeah, why do you think that it's not getting into the why don't we hear about this on normal channels? Because you and I, we're probably, you and I are fairly unique in that we actually go seek out this information. You with your research, me with the network of startups that we're working with around the world. What do you think the resistance is to the information?
Well, the mainstream media doesn't really report on innovation that much, only little blips of it. So, these are in scientific journals and specific, there's not a big overarching theme for the MSM. And it's also not quite as exciting as kind of the horse race mentality of politics or, some big disaster. So it doesn't get the eyeballs and clicks.
But the second question. So obviously entrepreneurs are unique in that a lot of times we're not necessarily thinking about this from a standpoint of our own labor, other than making sure that our businesses are relevant. But how does someone, prepare their career, whether it's as an entrepreneur or as an employee, for all these changes? What would you actually have people do?
Education first. And that's kind of what I decided 3 years ago my mission would be, is to educate people. Not only, we see lots of doom and gloom about the future right now, particularly around climate change, but educate them, and educate them in a way where they can see the good and the opportunities. And then last, what can they do? What kind of a world do they want? And get involved. Put your opinion out there. Do you want all the big oligarchs and big corporations to own all this? Or do you want it to be a more distributed, democratic focus on small business and individuals having a piece of the action here?
What do you think we have to do to drive that? I love the fact that the technologies you're talking about, we don't have to have the big coal plant or the big nuclear plant that requires, $1 billion to do. We can actually have all the distributed activity and stuff like that. What is it that we as a community of practice should be doing to help drive those type of outcomes? Because I totally agree with you. I'm excited as a technologist about the shift. What do you think we have to do what can we do to make sure that happens?
Well, I think, democracy makes a big difference. You look at Russia, all the oligarchs are the billionaires. Look at what's happening to the Russian people, particularly the ones that are not in St. Petersburg or Moscow. They're getting drafted. They don't even have indoor plumbing, So, politics, I tell people, I listen to people who say, oh, I hate politics. Well, the difference between a democracy and an autocracy is there's still politics in an autocracy, but only a few people get to be involved. A corporation is an autocracy, most of them. Only the execs get an input for the most part. There's some good ones where they take input from everybody, but you don't get a say. So everything is politics. Politics is simply the rules we have to live by and how resources are allocated. So in the future, if we got these new technologies and all these changes taking place, how do we want the resources to be allocated? Does the government fund all this research and then a couple of big corporations take that on and make it their own? Or do we find a way that everybody can participate a little bit and we have some stability and security financially and economically in our lives?
Yeah, no, that's one of the biggest concerns I have, is how that we can continue to build, be as capitalistic as possible, but build a safety net for entrepreneurs so that the entrepreneurs that are actually, especially that are listening to this program, are able to pick up this new technology and take the risk with it, drive the new business models that actually will shift that outcome to make it more generally widely accessible. I totally agree with you. Let's do this. I know that we have at least Paul has his hand back up. I know we have a little bit of time, just about 5 minutes, 10 minutes maybe, for if there's like a slide or two you want to go ahead and go over, John, and before we switch out. Feel free to bring it up and hop right in, but I might see if we can take a question or two from both the studio audience as well as the streaming audience.
Yeah, sure. There are a couple little ones here. So I'm looking at actually starting a daily newsletter because, and it would be very short. And I'm thinking about a biweekly or weekly podcast on this because there's just so much happening. And so some of the latest developments, this was just posted on American Genius, which is a locally run internet web magazine. If this is true, this is going to put every other EV manufacturer behind Tesla for another 5 years. And it's entirely possible.
For people that are listening, for people that are listening versus seeing your screen, on the slide says Tesla's new $12,000 electric vehicle due in 2024. Say a little bit more about it, John.
Well, Tesla's not been good at delivery, even in 2025, but their cheapest, I bought their cheapest EV and at $40,000, but if they can drop it to 12,000 and it's a nice car, which with 20 moving parts, as long as batteries come down, they could certainly do it. That is going to be revolutionary. Everybody can have a car, and it'll sell worldwide. This is the equivalent of the VW Beetle and more. This is like the Honda Civic and Toyota Corolla in the late 80s and early 90s blew the U.S. Auto industry out. So that is revolutionary. Let's see. I've got one more in here. Disruptive business models. We've seen Uber and Lyft. Tesla also did, and I don't want to be, there are things I admire and like about Tesla and even about Elon. I'm not a big fanboy. So, but these just happen to pop up this week. They're doing a virtual power plant here in Texas. So if you've got solar or battery, you can use your Tesla app to join this virtual power plant. And whenever the Texas grid needs power, you buy power at about 10 to 13 cents per kilowatt hour, sometimes less. You can sell it back at high demand cycles for $2 a kilowatt hour. And they tried this in California. They did a pilot last April in Texas, and most people made $15 to $60 per month on their virtual power plant. Now imagine if they plug all the EVs, 18,000 in Travis County, all the solar, all the batteries into a virtual power plant across the nation. And anybody who's got power can sell it back if we need it. That's a game changer too.
Yeah, especially in the regards to what a year and a half ago or so, or actually, what was it, a couple of years ago, during the snow apocalypse.
21 snow apocalypse, right?
Yeah,
and
they went down in Texas.
And the hotter summers when we hit 105, 110 degrees, and people are running their AC like crazy. People are passing out from heat stroke. hugely important.
Exactly. Well, let's take some questions. I know that Paul's got his hand raised. I don't know if you still, Paul, do you still have your question you'd like to ask?
I've got it. Can I go ahead, Kevin?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. Excellent reference to the American genius. That's Lonnie and Ben here locally. They're great folks. And Lonnie's had a little illness, but she's got some incredible news. I really appreciate that you cited that. And then the next thing is in the Austin Business Journal, Tesla just reached out for $1 billion in construction. Their plant is by far the largest plant in Austin. They're planning to build another 1.4 million square feet at a value of 717 million, according to their fifth filing that appeared January 10th on the the state website. Right now, if you compare them to Samsung and NXP, the next two plants in Austin, Tesla's at 4 million square feet. NXP and Samsung are both about 2.5 million square feet. The Tesla plant is covered with solar panels, and I don't know if how much they have now, but I think that you're onto something when you cited Tesla toward the end. And regardless of what you think of Elon and all that political stuff, I think they're definitely a force to be reckoned with. I'm 4 miles from the Boring Company where I have my place out in Cedar Creek.
I love that
place,
name.
Huh?
I love that name. The Boring Company.
They're coming this way. They're heading this way. I can feel them right now. I feel their presence, and it's an incredible impact. So I wish you would address the incredible impact. They measure the Tesla plant in pentagons. I think there were 3 pentagons. Now they're up to probably 4 or 5. So
I hadn't
wish
heard
you
that.
would address these developments. Okay.
Sure. I hadn't heard that. I'm kind of disappointed that they haven't gone more with their solar business. But apparently, they're heading forward where they're successful right now. It's amazing they're doing a plant in the United States. And I would have expected them to maybe break ground in Mexico. But apparently they've learned a lot of things from the work on the Cybertruck. They're going to use those techniques to supposedly bring out a $12,000 EV. And they have gone from, in 20 years, they've gone from, a few hundred EVs to well over 1 million. And the largest company in the world, Toyota Auto Company, was building 10 million cars at its peak. So they've got 5 plants. Each of those plants can do about 500,000. They would merely have to expand those or build 5 more to hit 10 million. The growth is astonishing.
Well, it's interesting. It's definitely interesting to see that the main thing about it is the individuals that are actually saying that electric vehicles aren't going to be there, obviously don't have the data that we do. We have another hand that's raised. Let me go ahead and switch over. Let's ask David Potes, one of our entrepreneurs from Monterrey, Mexico, is got his hand raised. David, what's your question? Oh, are you able to hear me, David?
He's got his, there we go.
Yeah, I know you're off of mute.
Hola, David.
There it is. Hey, how you doing? No, I just wanted to add more than a question. I just wanted to add also to this Tesla. Actually, they announced that they're going to build a plant here in Mexico, right here in Monterrey, actually very near to where.
Wonderful. I went to the Tech de Monterrey. I love it in Monterrey.
A big Chinese company, they're a big supplier for them. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we're here. I don't know if you hear me correctly because I just got the signal that I have a unstable connection.
Yeah.
But yeah, Tesla, and all different EVs has become a boom here in Mexico also. And I mean, like I said, they announced they're gonna build this new plant right here in Santa Catarina, that is a county here in Monterrey.
Well, Mexico is a perfect partner for the United States. Mexico's got a young population. They're building their families. They're buying cars and all kinds of different things for their kids, educating their kids, houses, cars. And they've got, lots and lots of good, relatively well-educated labor. So great partner for the United States in manufacturing. Tesla's interesting, but there's the guy who was the battery chief, went and founded Redwood Materials to recycle 100% the Tesla batteries. And Teslas are now what the oldest are maybe 15 years old. So we're just barely starting to recycle all these batteries. But Redwood Materials also did a deal with the largest recycler in the United States, in North America, to recycle all of their solar panels. So there's been a lot of talk about how toxic old solar panels are, but Redwood now can recycle 90% or more of the materials in the solar panels. I find that almost more interesting than I do some of these expansions at Tesla. So, there is room for all kinds of entrepreneurs to find a niche and go out and build a business around these expanding energy and transportation disruptions.
Yeah, that's one of the things too. One of our entrepreneurs he's worked with a very large battery recycling place in Oklahoma City, right? We did a lot of work in Oklahoma City with one of the co-working locations there, and several of the entrepreneurs there also were tied into that as well. So the whole value chain is there. It's interesting. Back to the Mexico point, we will be having some more conversations happening about that. I know for those of you all that know my long history of working with entrepreneurs in Mexico, there will be some announcements coming very soon, and that directly have shaped this whole idea of the supply chain that's moving away from China and towards Mexico is real exciting, because I'd rather those jobs be in the hands of our neighbors, within
Absolutely.
4 to 6 hours driving distance away from where I'm sitting right now. So
it's moving. It's not only moving to Mexico, but it's moving to Latin America. This potentially, one of the big problems with Central America is not only the disasters, but the poverty. And so, if you could go down and create an area where you put in a whole bunch of solar panels and wind and batteries, and then sell that back to Mexico or the United States, but that would fund factories down there. You then build homes down there. You have a nice stable place. You could bring a lot of prosperity to places like El Salvador and Guatemala. You can build on it in Brazil, in Chile, in Venezuela even. And not only Latin America, but I think you're starting to see a little bit of this in Africa and a lot of Southeast Asia. And so, what do you need to do entrepreneurism and have manufacturing and factories and jobs? You need power. So how do you do power? Well, if it's going to be 70, 80, 90% cheaper, and you can build it in a year or 2 or 3, not 5 or 10 or 20, you do it with renewables.
Exactly.
And it's healthier. And so this is an amazing thing. I mean, we can build this, fund it, and extend it, and it can pay for itself. Now, I did a lot of work on ROI, and the ROI on starting to put the energy in, then the transportation, and then build the factories, the housing, all that sort of thing, the rest of the infrastructure around it, the education, the ROI is just potentially astonishing.
Do this. Since we're right at the end of our time, do you have any final words you'd like to wrap with?
Yeah, let me, we can get there. Rethink X has a really good plan for how we get to zero carbon. We can do it a lot like the interstate highway system in the United States. I've got some facts on that I'll share later. How do we get there? They did a big study. It's online. We can talk about that. But we can do that, and we can export this so that every country has its energy security and has the ability to build its own economy based on the training of its own people. I think this presents an amazing opportunity to help other nations and get to zero carbon at the same time, bring prosperity across the globe.
Yeah, when it makes sense. The best part about that is it makes sense even if you don't buy into climate change, the future you're pointing to makes a lot of sense, just because the technology is there in a place that actually makes it all possible to adopt this quickly. So that's a beautiful story that you're sharing, John.
And I focus on the economics.
Yeah.
You know, the economics is driving it. You've seen blips here with government and people pushing it, but the masses really haven't gotten behind it. Governments haven't gotten behind it en masse, but the entrepreneurs are driving this right now. They see trillion-dollar opportunities to disrupt entrenched businesses out there and make much higher profits. And I can go into a lot of the economics too at some future point, but the economics are driving it now. I think the masses are starting to get behind it. As the masses get behind it and get involved in politics and say that we want a better world, the governments have to line up, at least the democratic governments.
Yeah, well, we'll get a chance to identify more into that. Let's do this. So
Great.
For today, what we're going to do is we'll go ahead and take a wrap on the conversation. We'll have John come back. He's involved in the community now too. So if you have questions, make sure you post them to the in the community.techranch.com. There is a channel for the VO Weekly, the Venture Outfitter Weekly. Make sure that if you have follow-on questions you want to have, if you want to ask John some more questions about the stuff that he posted, make sure you take them to that site. That's techranch.com. And all right, it's community.techranch.com, and then look for the channel VO Weekly. Jello every week post our videos into there, and then a lot of times it would be like follow-on conversations about, hey, I got a question about this and stuff like that. Also, the show notes on the YouTube will be there as well. So what we'll do is if you're not on our email list, our mentor list, our country manager list, if you want to get involved, there's a bunch of different places to get involved on this one URL, techranch.com/connect. We are starting to post a lot of the different entry points into the site, into different aspects of TechRanch here, just because we're trying to make it easier as we update the website. In fact, we just kind of threw out a lot of the old cruft of the website. You'll see a lot more activity happening like that. Paloma on our marketing team and Jello from the standpoint of our community management are really driving some big change there. So get involved. And as I mentioned earlier, for anyone that hears this, especially if you're an entrepreneur, you want to get involved in our community, we do have a level that we're going to be talking about next week about for the venture outfitter portion of the community. But to get involved in the community itself, there's no charge, and especially for long-term family members, and you guys know who you are, that have been involved in Venture Forth and some of the other TechRanch activities. Make sure you get involved soon. Especially before we invite the 400 or so people that are in the old Slack channels, as well as we're going to be inviting all of the Venture Forth alumni over the 50 groups and stuff like that. I'm going to go ahead and Paul, I see your hand. Go ahead and post your question out into the community, and we'll follow up after we close up the streams for today. I want to make sure that I go ahead and get to the final slide. And we will have time for a question or two. When we close up the sessions, a lot of times we'll have a little bit more information that happens for the people that are in the green room, essentially. John, thank you very much for reaching out to me after that last presentation. Great to have you here today.
Thank you, Kevin.
And
I think this is so important for job seekers, for entrepreneurs, actually for everyone. And if anybody on this wants to connect, I just posted my contact info, and I will be on the community. And if you know somebody I need to talk to, or somebody who wants me to come talk to their company or group or whatever, I'm available for that. I'm working towards having a newsletter, a podcast, and being a professional speaker, getting paid to talk. But right now, I'm just doing it to build a reputation.
Well, yeah, and especially with all the changes that are happening, we definitely need, people who are guideposts for pointing to where the future is and where to be looking, because like you're saying, a lot of the mainstream media right now just doesn't post about a lot of innovation because it's too new, but this stuff is so disruptive that it's important. So
Yes.
well, with that, what we'll do is we'll say thank you to the community. Thank you for the people logged into the studio audience, as well as our viewers online on LinkedIn and Facebook. It's always an honor to be a part of a community of practice of entrepreneurs that are driven by vision and values. Let's go change the future, the world for the better together, and do this stuff with the future that John's pointing to. Thank you all for today. Y'all take care.
Thanks, Kevin, for all you do.